Welcome to Jim Apologetics. This is, of course, your host, Jim. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. If you leave an interesting comment, I'll get back to you. If you want some one-on-one time, we can schedule that over Zoom or Discord, and you can also hit me up on my business email. In my previous video, which was extremely popular, I talked about the global reality of Orthodox Christianity, using a variety of maps, graphs, and statistics to talk especially about Russia and the state of religiosity in the world and Eastern Europe, where Orthodoxy has its main base, as of now. Today we'll be covering Orthodox reality, or Orthodox Christianity, particularly in the Middle East. This video is not going to focus on the Oriental Orthodox churches. They will have their own video. So to anyone who is going, well, where are all the Christians in the northeast of Syria, or where are all the Christians in Egypt, which are millions and millions, I will be covering the Orientals in a different video. When we look at maps of the Middle East, we can see the Christians are by no means the majority in any of the countries, except for parts of Lebanon. In this custom map that I made here, which includes some Orientals in a different color, the striped or not completely filled in colored areas are areas where Christians are the plurality, or perhaps even a minority, but a notable minority. For example, in Egypt, which we'll cover in the next video on Oriental Orthodox, you see Al-Minya province is partially Copt, because it's not majority, but this is an area where there is notable Coptic Christian presence. The same applies to the coast of Syria, where Christians are by no means the majority of Syria's coast, but they are the majority in some villages and areas, and they're an important part of the population. It is only in Lebanon, with Mount Lebanon and the North Lebanon Governorate, that we can say there are any federations in the Middle East that are actually, and by federation I mean district, governorate, state, however you want to call it, any district or state that is actually majority Christian. So Lebanon's the only place. And it happens to be that in Lebanon, which we're going to zoom into right now, where the majority of my family comes from, we can see that the premier Christians are the Maronites. The Maronites are an Eastern Catholic branch, but Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, is also quite prominent in Lebanon. Orthodox Christians by themselves are about 8 to 10% of the citizen population of Lebanon, meaning not including the constantly changing, hiring and lowering number of refugees coming in from the Syrian war or leaving back to Syria or other nations. So about 8 to 10% of the country. Orthodox Christianity traditionally lived amongst the coasts of Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria in the urban centers. And so when Arabic first spread during the rise of Islam into areas that it had not already existed, it was adopted most quickly by the Orthodox, who derogatorily were called by the Orientals Melkite, or essentially an ancient way of saying imperialists, because they belonged with loyalty to the Byzantine Empire. But the Orthodox, fancying themselves as the elites of the region, adopted Arabic quite quickly and lived in the urban centers, whereas the Maronites and the Orientals lived more in rural areas. So you'll see that in these maps, most of the time the Orthodox live closer to the coast or closer to a city. But there are many rural Orthodox as well. There's a lot of villages in Mount Lebanon that are majority or plurality Orthodox Christian. The Orthodox in Lebanon primarily live in Mount Lebanon and the North Lebanon Governorate, as well as in Beirut. There are some areas in the Bekaa where you find the Orthodox Christians as well, but the majority are in kind of this western column of Lebanon. If we move on to Syria here, we see that in this extremely detailed map, produced by, I think, GulfNation or something.com, I'll leave the link below, we can see that Christians in Syria share the same trajectory as Alawites and other minorities that are in the coast. These minorities are actually the majority of the population in the coast, and the Christians kind of live in a linear or parallel pattern to the Alawites, but in smaller numbers. There are approximately 1.2 or 1.3 Christians in Syria today, down from around 2 million when the war began so many years ago. Many had to leave. The Christians in Syria, who are Orthodox at least, primarily live amongst the coast. Some are in Damascus as well. That is primarily it. Other Christians you may see on this map, living in the Far East, like Deir ez-Zor, or the Northeast, are Syriacs and Armenians, who are both Oriental Christians. There's also Eastern Catholics, called Melkite Catholics, that live in the north, near Aleppo, which is actually where my Melkite grandmother is from. The family is from Aleppo in Syria. So you have Melkites up there. There's also Melkites in Damascus and amongst the coast as well. This map that I showed just now labels all Christians that are Arabs or Arabic-speaking Christians as Shami or Levantine. So it does not make any difference between Orthodox or Catholic, but I still wanted to show it because of the immense detail. Here's my version of the map of Syria, showing just the Orthodox, and we can see that they're not the majority in any area of Syria, but they are a strong minority in the coast, Damascus, part of the north, and also in the southeast, near the Druze. There are quite a few Orthodox, as well as some Orientals, which of course we'll get into. Orthodox Christians in Syria, even though they're actually similar proportionally to the number of Orthodox Christians in Lebanon, as a percent of the gross population, have obviously less influence in the affairs of Syria, because Christians as a whole are only 10 to 11% of Syria's population, whereas Christians as a whole are closer to 40% in Lebanon, as we see from these demographics here. So Syria as well shares a history that Lebanon has. This whole region used to be one, and the Orthodox Christians always were the more elite of the Christians, more urban dwelling and closer to the coast. So back in the ancient days when Islam was first beginning to spread, Syria was a mix of Oriental and Eastern Orthodox, and both of these denominations actually detested each other. And it was actually the Orientals who had sided temporarily with the Arab Muslim invaders, and the Eastern Orthodox who sided with the Byzantine Empire. And both had competing interests. The same story can be said of Egypt, which we'll get to later. We move on, we see Jordan here. Jordan is always forgotten when we talk about Christians, but there's actually a large number of Christians in Jordan. About 350 to maximum 400,000 Christians live in Jordan. Many are of Palestinian origin, and they had moved east into Jordan after the events that took away their land by the Israelis. So when the Israeli state was set up, many of the Palestinians moved into Jordan, and that's why about 50 to 60% of the population of Jordan today is actually Palestinian. It's kind of evenly split between Catholics and Orthodox. There's actually not that many Eastern Melkite Catholics in Jordan. The majority of Catholics are Roman Catholic, believe it or not. So about 60% of Christians in Jordan are Eastern Orthodox and 40% are Catholics, the majority being Roman Catholic. So we can say confidently that there are about 200 to 250,000 Orthodox Christians of Jordanian descent, either Palestinian or Jordanian, living in the country of Jordan. The eastern part of Jordan is quite interesting. As I stated, it's Bedouin, it's tribal culture originally, and there are actually tribal Bedouin, there are Bedouin tribes, that live in eastern Jordan, and many of them had come from the Arabian Peninsula. So you'll see that there are Christian Bedouin tribes who practice, dress the same way, talk the same way, live the exact same lifestyle as other Bedouins do, and they happen to be Christian. I think it's important to find these communities and look at them seriously, because Bedouin culture and Arabian culture is not a product just of Islam. In fact, it existed before Islam. And so there are many Christians of Bedouin origin. Some even live in Syria, and actually I've heard of one family who are Bedouin Christians that live in Lebanon. So the area is quite diverse. We're going to move now into the Holy Land, and it's not really a happy story here at all. You look at a map, Christians are not really any majority in any area. They're quite a small minority, even smaller than in Jordan. And of these Christians, many of them are foreign Christians, which by itself is not a bad thing. We want the Holy Land to be more Christian. But it is sad that the people indigenous to the area, the Palestinian Christians, are only like 2% of the population of the Palestinian territories, and maybe 3 to 4% of the population of the Israeli state. So really not a lot left. About 500,000 went to Latin America alone when the events that took away the Holy Land took place back in the 1940s. So it's quite a sad state. The majority of the Palestinian Christians are Orthodox, and a plurality, not a plurality, but a smaller portion are Melkite, not too many Roman Catholics. And yeah, that's kind of it. Other than Palestinians, we have, of course, the Greek Orthodox Church has set up and has authority over a lot of land in and around Jerusalem, and of course the old city itself. So we don't just have the Palestinians, but Greeks, and even there's Russian monasteries in the Holy Land. So that is a bonus to having, a foreign presence, as you have a lot of Christians in there as well. We're going to move on now to Egypt, which I don't think anybody thought we would cover, because Egypt is Copt land when we're talking about Christianity. But there actually is a minority of Eastern Orthodox Christians who live in Egypt, and my family happens to be part of that community. It's called the Syro or Syro-Lebanese community that lived within Egypt. So the Syro-Lebanese minority had lived in Egypt for hundreds of years. My family has a history in Egypt that goes back at least 150 years. And these were people from Syria and Lebanon, primarily Christians, who moved to Egypt for business purposes but stayed for many generations. They primarily lived in Alexandria and Cairo, and that is where we find the highest number of Eastern Orthodox Christians. The most of them came from the Levant. And so there are probably around 300,000, from all the estimates of demography I could gather, 300,000 Eastern Orthodox Christians found in Egypt. There are some by the St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula, and of course Alexandria and Cairo. They have a very interesting story. I'll do a video entirely just on the Syro-Lebanese Orthodox of Egypt one day, because it's so relevant to me and my dad's side of the family. But yeah, I thought that would be very interesting to show. One last thing to note is that there actually are Bedouin Christians in Sinai, because Sinai is majority Bedouin. The people who live there have more of a tribal Arab culture. They're not the same as the urban, very Egyptianized culture of, obviously, Egypt, mainland Egypt. But in Sinai, it's more of a Bedouin culture, and it has been for thousands of years, even before Islam has spread. So there are Christian Bedouins found in the Sinai Peninsula. I could not pull up a map of their statistics because the population is just too small to look at. I'm talking about a minority within a minority. And within Egypt, it's hard to find the population of just the Eastern Orthodox. So here's a map I concocted showing where the Eastern Orthodox would be. And then, of course, these are the Oriental Coptic Orthodox. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope I didn't leave anything important out. These are the main communities found in the Middle East. I did not include Cyprus or Armenia because I consider them to be on the very fringe edge of the Middle East, and they're not entirely part of the Middle East. One last note I'll say is that if you look at this map of Anatolia, Turkey, we see that in the Hatay province, which used to belong to Syria and traditionally is part of the Syrian ecosystem, we see a large number of Arab Christians, the vast majority of which are Orthodox. So Turkey actually does have one little nugget where there's a lot of Eastern Orthodox there. And I would say, of all the people I speak to on Discord who convert to Eastern Orthodoxy and are from the Middle East, other than Arabs, probably the most prominent ethnicity would be Turks. And they seem to be the most reasonable when they come and they ask questions, if they're Muslim. And I've heard from David Erhan and a few others who I've spoken to that it is growing bit by bit in Turkey. So we'll pray for that as well. And please pray for all victims, whether Muslim or Christian, who were affected by the horrific earthquake. Please pray for them. They'll be in our hearts and in our prayers.